Don't forget to like and share this video. Drop your thoughts in the comments below and sign up to stay updated with our latest content. What if a single dinner, something as ordinary as candlelight, wine, and laughter, could shatter everything you thought you knew about love, friendship, and loyalty? That night, I had planned everything to be perfect. My husband, David, his longtime best friend, Mark, and I, just like countless dinners before. But nothing could have prepared me for what Mark was about to say. His words would hang in the air like a storm waiting to break, unraveling years of memories and opening wounds we didn't know existed. What do you do when the truth arrives too late, but still changes everything? What started as an ordinary evening quickly took on a weight I couldn't explain. After days of careful planning, I had set the table with our finest china, polished the silverware until it gleamed, and folded the linen napkins just the way David liked. The warm aroma of rosemary chicken filled the air, wrapping the house in a cozy, comforting scent. Everything looked perfect, but something inside me didn't feel quite right. David had invited Mark over, just like old times. They had been best friends since college, inseparable through every chapter of life. Mark had been part of our story for so long that his presence at dinner felt natural, expected even. But as I adjusted the flowers in the centerpiece and caught my reflection in the wine glass, I felt something shift, a quiet energy in the air, a tension I couldn't place. The doorbell rang, followed by the familiar sound of their laughter. Mark's voice, always warm and easy, echoed through the hallway. When they walked in, everything appeared normal. David with his boyish grin, Mark with that calm presence that made everyone feel at ease. Yet behind his smile, I noticed something in Mark's eyes I had never seen before. Hesitation, maybe even sadness. We sat down and conversation flowed effortlessly at first. They reminisced about college, trading stories I'd heard a dozen times before. I laughed along, grateful for the comfort of routine. David poured wine. We toasted to friendship, to years gone by, to memories that bound us together. But then, it happened. It was subtle at first. Mark's voice softened. His gaze lingered longer than usual. His fingers traced the rim of his glass, like he was gathering the courage to say something unspeakable. I didn't know it yet, but this dinner, the one I thought would be just another pleasant evening, was about to unravel the very foundation of everything I believed to be true. At first, I thought I was imagining it, that quiet shift in Mark's demeanor, but then it became undeniable. As we moved into dessert, Mark grew unusually quiet. His spoon sat untouched beside the slice of apple tart I had carefully prepared. He stared into his wine glass like it held some hidden answer, his fingers nervously circling the rim. Then he looked up, not at David, at me. "I need to tell you both something," he said, his voice suddenly low and fragile. I felt my breath hitch. David, still unaware, leaned back in his chair with a casual grin. "Come on, Mark, don't get all dramatic on us," he joked. But Mark didn't smile. Instead, he exhaled sharply and turned fully toward me. "This is about you, Anna." The room went still. My fork hovered midair. "Me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He nodded, then glanced briefly at David, guilt flickering across his face before his eyes returned to mine. "I should have said this years ago, but I couldn't. I buried it for the sake of our friendship, for your marriage, but I can't hold it in anymore." David chuckled nervously, clearly not understanding the gravity in Mark's voice. "Mark, what are you talking about?" And then those 7 words that would fracture everything. I've been in love with Anna for years. The air was sucked from the room. I froze. David did too. All I could hear was the ticking of the wall clock behind us, steady and relentless. My pulse pounded in my ears. I stared at Mark, stunned, trying to make sense of his words. It felt impossible, like a cruel dream, but the look in Mark's eyes told me it wasn't. It was real, all of it. And in that moment, everything we thought was certain suddenly wasn't. For a moment, no one moved. The silence that followed Mark's confession was deafening, thicker than any words could have been. I could feel the fork slipping from my fingers, the chill of the wine glass against my skin, the rapid beating of my heart as my mind scrambled to process what I'd just heard. David was the first to break the stillness. He let out a short, almost disbelieving laugh, shaking his head as though trying to wake from a strange dream. "All right, Mark, you've clearly had a bit too much wine." But Mark didn't back down. He leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "I'm not drunk, David. I'm telling you the truth. I've carried this for too long, and I can't pretend anymore." I could feel David's confusion turn into something darker, anger. He pushed back his chair with a loud scrape against the floor, standing up so quickly that the candles flickered in protest. "Why now?" he demanded, his tone sharp. "Why would you drop this on us like a bomb?" Mark met his gaze, unwavering. "Because I thought I could live with it. But I can't." His words pierced the room like a blade. I sat frozen, torn between 2 people who had been pillars in my life. One my husband, the other, a friend I now realized I'd never truly understood. "I don't expect anything from you," Mark said quietly, turning to me. "I know you love David. I'm not here to take you away. I had to be honest, at least once." David looked at me, his eyes searching mine for something: certainty, denial, reassurance. But I didn't know what to give him. I was just as shaken. "What do you say when the foundation of your life begins to crack, not because of something you did, but because of a truth someone else had been hiding?" I had no answers, only questions, and a storm of emotions neither of us were prepared to face. David's eyes didn't leave mine, but I could see the shift in them: confusion bleeding into doubt, and doubt morphing into something colder: hurt, betrayal. Even though I hadn't done anything, the weight of Mark's confession had already settled like a crack in glass, spreading through everything we thought was solid. "You didn't tell me," David said finally, his voice low, brittle. "You didn't tell me how you felt about him." "I didn't feel anything," I said quickly, too quickly. "Not like that. I didn't know, David, I swear." But he wasn't looking at me anymore. He had turned away, pacing slowly, hands raking through his hair like he was trying to pull the thoughts from his mind. "But how can you be sure?" he whispered. "How can you be so sure that you never felt anything for him? Not even for a moment?" His words stung more than I expected. I felt a tremble rise in my chest, part disbelief, part pain. "Because I didn't," I replied, softer now, like I was trying to convince both of us. "Mark was always just Mark, a friend, nothing more." But even as I said it, I knew the damage had already been done. Trust once shaken doesn't return in an instant. For the next few days, silence moved into our home like an uninvited guest. We spoke little, and when we did, the conversations were careful, edged with tension. David was distant, present, but not really there. I watched him disappear into his thoughts more and more, his eyes often fixed out the window, like he was waiting for something to make sense again. And me? I was left questioning everything, not just Mark's hidden feelings, but the cracks they had exposed in our own marriage. Was our bond as strong as I thought? Or had we simply never tested it under this kind of strain? The truth was, we were no longer standing where we had been. Mark's confession hadn't just shaken David, it had placed a wedge between us that neither of us knew how to remove. The days after Mark's confession stretched on like a fog, thick, heavy, and silent. David and I moved around each other like strangers, careful not to touch the wound still fresh between us. I kept thinking the tension would fade, that things would return to normal, but nothing about our life felt normal anymore. Then one evening, just as I was beginning to accept the silence, there was a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. My heart skipped as I opened it to find Mark standing there, his hands deep in his coat pockets, his eyes filled with something I hadn't seen before, uncertainty. "Mark," I breathed, "what are you doing here?" "I know I shouldn't be," he said gently, "but I needed to see you. Just one last time. To apologize." Part of me wanted to close the door right then, but another part, the part still tangled in confusion, stepped aside and let him in. Mark entered quietly, not the confident man who had once laughed in our living room, but someone burdened, even broken. He didn't sit, he didn't move toward me, he simply stood, like he was waiting for permission to speak. "I made a mistake," he began. "I thought telling you would give me peace, but all I've done is hurt you. And David, that was never what I wanted." I didn't respond at first, I couldn't. The room felt like it was holding its breath. "I carried those feelings for so long," he continued, "and I convinced myself that honesty would be better than silence. But I realize now I was selfish." His words cut deeper than I expected, not because they hurt, but because they were true, honest, heavy. "You didn't mean to destroy anything," I said quietly, "but you did. And now we're left trying to pick up the pieces." Mark nodded, the regret in his eyes unmistakable. "I just needed you to know I'm sorry for everything." And as he turned to leave, I realized this moment this apology might not fix what was broken, but maybe it was a start. As the door clicked softly behind Mark, I stood motionless in the quiet. The house felt even emptier than before, like his apology had stirred something that now refused to settle. I pressed my back against the door, eyes closed, trying to breathe through the storm still raging inside me. His words echoed in my mind. "I just needed you to know I'm sorry." But sorry didn't erase the chaos. It didn't change what had been said, or the pain that lingered in David's eyes every time he looked at me now. I sat down on the couch, feeling the weight of everything. Mark's confession wasn't something I could just file away and forget. It had forced me to look at my life from angles I had never considered, to question the bonds I thought were unshakable. Yes, I was angry, not just at Mark, but at the situation he had thrown me into. He had carried that secret for years, and in one moment, he had placed it into my hands like a burden I never asked for. And yet, a part of me also hurt for him, for how long he must have kept those feelings locked away, for the loneliness of loving someone in silence. But what mattered now wasn't how he felt. It was how David felt, how we would recover if we could at all. When David came home that night, he didn't ask if Mark had come by. He didn't need to. The look in my eyes told him everything. He sat beside me in silence, his presence familiar but distant. "I told him we need space," I said softly. "Time for all of us." David nodded slowly, not looking at me. "I don't know what comes next." "Neither do I," I whispered. "But I know I haven't stopped loving you." It was the truth. And maybe, just maybe, it was enough to hold on to for now. David didn't say anything at first. He just sat there staring ahead, as if trying to find solid ground beneath emotions that still felt like quicksand. But when I said, "I haven't stopped loving you," something in his face softened just slightly, but enough for me to notice. For days we had been drifting in silence, each trapped in our own hurt. But now, there was a shared stillness, one not born from distance, but from a quiet willingness to begin again. The next morning, for the first time in what felt like weeks, David made coffee for both of us. He didn't speak much, but the gesture itself felt like a thread, a fragile one pulling us back towards something familiar. Healing didn't come all at once. It came in moments, small, almost unnoticeable things. A soft glance, a hand brushing against mine as we passed in the hallway, the way he waited for me to join him at the table again. We began to talk not about Mark, not at first, but about us, our life, our memories, the silly things we used to laugh at, the future we had dreamed about before everything felt so uncertain. Some nights were still hard. There were pauses in our conversations that felt too long, moments when trust still flickered, unsure if it would fully return. But there was also effort on both sides. And that mattered more than anything. I no longer replayed Mark's words in my head. I let them drift further into the background each day, no longer letting them define the space between David and me. Instead, I focused on rebuilding step by step, heart to heart, because maybe love isn't just about weathering the storms. Maybe it's about choosing each other even when the sky is still gray. And we were choosing slowly, quietly, but together. In the weeks that followed, the heaviness began to lift, not completely, but enough to let light in again. The house felt warmer, not because everything had gone back to the way it was, but because we were learning to exist honestly within the space that remained. David and I still had moments of silence, but they no longer felt like walls. They were spaces where healing quietly settled like soft dust after a storm. We didn't rush the process. There was no need to pretend that everything was fine. We were honest about the hurt, about the fear, about the work it would take to rebuild trust. And slowly we did. We cooked together again, nothing elaborate, just simple meals that reminded us of who we were before the night everything changed. We watched old movies, let ourselves laugh without forcing it. We sat outside some evenings, wrapped in blankets, just listening to the wind without needing to speak. It was in those quiet moments that I realized something. Maybe the truth, as painful as it had been, was also a gift. Not Mark's love that wasn't ours to carry, but the way it had forced us to confront what we had taken for granted. David and I began to understand each other differently, not as the perfect versions of ourselves we once tried to be, but as flawed, fragile, and deeply human partners willing to grow through the mess. One night, as we sat by the fireplace, David reached for my hand without saying a word. His grip was firm, grounding. I looked at him, and in that moment I knew we were going to be okay. Not because it was easy, but because we were choosing each other again, every day, even when it was hard. And in that quiet, steady choosing, I found something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope, not the kind built on perfection, the kind built on truth, forgiveness, and love that refuses to give up. Sometimes life doesn't fall apart because of what we do, but because of what remains unspoken. This story reminds us that long-held silence can be just as heavy as any mistake, and that truth, even when painful, deserves to be met with compassion and maturity. For those of us in the later chapters of life, perhaps the most valuable thing isn't perfection, but the ability to understand, to forgive, and to walk forward together. Long-lasting love isn't measured by the peaceful days, but by how we weather the storms, how we face moments of doubt and still choose each other in the end. We can't control how others feel, but we can control how we respond with grace, honesty, and a deep respect for the relationship we've built. This story is a gentle lesson for anyone who has been hurt by the truth. Real love doesn't avoid pain, it grows through it. In the quiet spaces after the storm, healing becomes possible not by forgetting, but by learning, by choosing connection again and again. And sometimes, that is the most beautiful kind of love there is. Thank you for joining us today. We'd love to hear from you. Please share in the comments one insight you gained and how you plan to apply it in your life. Your feedback is invaluable and keeps us motivated. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your support enables us to continue creating content that informs and inspires. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.